Hello again, Sharks. Welcome to our third video talking about the Force, and not the Force like in Star Wars. This is one of the most important of the basic concepts, as it is going to be the greatest benefit to any of your defenders. So we can see here a scenario with only one defender, only one cutter, and our handler. In this case, our space is here and here. Our cutter can make a play to any of those spaces, and our defender is going to have to try and follow him without any sort of guesswork or any sort of ability to determine which space he's likely to head to. That puts our defender at a huge disadvantage. So let's add another special defender. We call this defender the marker. The marker stays within 10 feet of the handler, 10 feet or 3 meters. The marker has a first job, which is to establish the stall count. They count from 1 to 10, and if they do reach 10, it's a turnover. The stall count is important not only because it gives us the potential for a turnover, but because it puts pressure on the handler and can hopefully influence them to make some bad decisions. Let's draw our handler's lanes. He has 2 lanes coming from the left, going to the left, and going to the right. That means both of our spaces are viable, and our cutter can go to either one he chooses. Let's position our marker in such a way that we clog one of these lanes. We'll position him over here, standing at about a 45-degree angle. Now this lane is clogged, and that makes this space not viable. That's going to give our defender a little bit of a break and make our cutter work a bit harder. So what does this look like now? Let's draw our spaces. The area behind this marker is kind of triangular in shape, and that's an area that's very, very hard to throw the disc into, to make a pass into. Why? Because our marker is physically in the way. Our marker can use his hands, his feet, even his face if he desires, to block the disc. That makes it very hard for a handler to put a nice, crisp, clean pass into that area. So even though it's wide open space, it's not particularly viable because there's no lane to it. We call that area the break zone, and we'll explain why it's called that a little later. But that leaves the other side of the field very open, and we call that the open side. So now where is our space? Our space is over here on the open side, which is going to be our upline passes. Our space is here behind the handler, and our space is a little bit over here to the right of the handler. Let's draw our lanes now. We have a lane going here for some swings and upline passes into the open side. We have a lane behind us for our dump or drop passes. And we have a lane over here to the right for our break swing pass. Our defenders now know where the lanes are, know where the spaces are, and can move to cover them. They know they don't have to cover the break zone because there's no pass coming there. And the other zones are small, and they don't gain a lot of yards. So they're going to cover the most prominent of zones, which is over here in the open side. So let's give you an example of how to cut into each of these different areas, into each of these different spaces. We'll start with this one and we'll make a nice upline cut. First we'll drive our defender out of the way. Then we'll turn hard on our heels and cut upline for the disc. The second option is for a dump or drop pass. These passes do lose yards, but they're valuable for multiple reasons. One reason is if the disc or if the handler is not a particularly strong handler, we can position someone behind them who is a strong handler to get an easy pass and then move the disc over into the hands of someone who can make a bigger and more complicated throw. The other thing we can do is pass to someone behind us who is unmarked. Anytime you see an undefended or unmarked person, we'd like to move the disc to them because without a break zone, they have many more options of spaces and lanes to throw, so they're always going to be more valuable. The third option is for a reset. If you're the handler and your stall count starts to get high, typically above 4 or 5, start looking to the sides for your swings and start looking backwards for your dumps and drops, just to reset your stall count. I'd much rather lose a few yards and keep the disc than lose the disc to some risky throw because the stall count was so high. So let's show what this cut would look like. First drive the defender away, then cut back into the space for the pass. Our third option is for our break swing. In this case, this is a great example of taking what our defender is giving us. If you notice, our defender is already over on the wrong side of us to cover this space. So we don't really need to do a cut because we already have separation. So just do a nice hard sprint to this area and you'll probably create enough separation to be open to receive the pass. Now let's talk about how we name our forces and how we call for them and how we decide which one to use. For right now, let's let our captains and our coaches on the sidelines decide which forces we're going to use or which way we're going to force. On this team, we use a different naming system than you'll find in most pickup games. Most pickup clubs use home and away for forces, or they use the terms flick and backhand. I don't like to use those because they can change depending on fields or left-handed or right-handed players. So for our case, we use the names force left and force right. This is always referenced off of us as the defenders. Since our defender is looking that way, that makes a force right forcing that way. We want the handler to throw in that direction. So we move our marker over here to this side. This is an example of a force right. Now that means as defenders, you know to stand over towards the open side, between the open spaces and your cutter. We can also do a hard right force. That's shown by moving even further over to this side. Now you're allowing some upline passes, but you're really stopping anything coming over to that side. If you can remember from our first diagram, our break swing space is now gone. So we can stop any of those potentials. So listen if one of your upfield captains or coaches calls for a hard force or for a regular force. That's what they mean. This is an example of a straight up force. This would stop most of the long hucks or deep upfield passes, but we don't use it very often. So let's talk about a left force. Remember, we're facing this way. So a force left wants the handler to throw in that direction. So we move over to this side. And it works the same again for a hard left force, where we move over even further. As a marker, you'll learn where you should stand, how far over you should stand, and where you should put your hands and feet, depending upon your own skills and the skills of the handler that you're marking. If you know your handler is particularly weak in one throw or another, you may force them to use that throw. And you may be able to stand over here for a hard force if they're a weak handler and don't have the powerful upline hucks. Let's talk about one special case now, which is a line force. Here we have the handler stuck very close to the sideline. A line force is very much similar to a hard force, except that you're forcing a little bit more towards the back. We won't cover that just yet. So for now, let's say that a line force is always going to be a hard force towards that line. Notice now that almost the entirety of the field is in the break zone. Their only lanes are forward down this sideline and backwards down the sideline. That leaves our defenders able to simply stand there and cover that space, shut down those lanes and shut down that space. Listen for your captains and your coaches when they call line forces. This is what they want. That's all for now. We'll start covering more advanced cutting techniques, more advanced defending techniques, and we'll start getting into stacks in the next videos.